The lounge at gate H7 had a dress code. Not a posted one, nothing so obvious, but the kind written into the carpet thickness and the particular angle of the host's smile when he looked at you and made his calculation in under 2 seconds. Lydia Farr got the look. Then she got the smile anyway, because the card she handed him was a medical professional transit pass, and the host was professional enough not to let the scrubs override the card. He showed her to a seat near the window, offered coffee, and retreated without making it obvious that the cracked duffel bag between her feet was the most worn piece of luggage in the room by a significant margin. She had not slept. 12 hours at Hargrove Memorial in Decatur, one of those nights where the beds kept filling faster than they cleared, and the attending had gone home with a migraine, and the charge nurse had looked at Lydia around 3 a.m. with the expression of someone trying not to ask for the fourth impossible thing. Lydia had stayed through handoff, driven directly to the airport, and was now waiting on a connection to Charlotte that boarded in 3 hours. From Charlotte, she would rent a car and drive to Fayetteville and be at Helen Elms's door before dark. The letter was in her badge holder. It had been there for 11 days. She had tried to get to Fayetteville 3 times, and something had stopped her each time. A shift she couldn't hand off, a flight canceled for weather, once just paralysis she couldn't name and didn't examine too closely. She didn't think of herself as superstitious, but she'd learned to take seriously the things that kept waiting. She was looking at a cargo truck moving slowly across the tarmac when the couple came in. She noticed them the way she noticed most things, without moving her head, without any visible shift in attention. It was a skill she'd developed in spaces where being visibly alert made people nervous, and she'd kept it after because it turned out to be useful everywhere. The man was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the particular ease of someone who had spent so long in rooms that rearranged themselves for him that he no longer noticed the rearranging. His watch caught the light. His coat was cashmere, the color of expensive weather. The woman beside him was younger by maybe 15 years, her posture the kind that comes from spending a lot of time being looked at. They stopped when they reached the seating area. The woman's eyes moved across the lounge, past the businessmen with laptops, past the retired couple with matching roller bags, and landed on Lydia in her corner. The scrubs, the duffel bag, the half-empty coffee cup with the cardboard sleeve that said Hargrove Memorial Hospital Cafeteria, which she hadn't gotten rid of because she'd been carrying it since 5 a.m. and hadn't thought about it. The woman said something to the man in a voice too low to catch. He looked at Lydia once, briefly, with an expression not of anger, but of the more particular contempt that doesn't need to be angry, the kind that has already made its decision, then turned and found the host. Lydia watched the conversation without watching it, the man's posture, the small decisive gesture of his hand. The host's expression, doing the thing that hosts' expressions do when a guest is asking for something technically within the rules and personally uncomfortable. It took about 4 minutes. The host came to her table with genuine apology written all over his face, which she respected. Some people didn't bother with the apology. He was maybe 25, and this was a terrible part of his job, and he was doing it as decently as he could. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. We've had a concern raised about," he stopped, reconsidered his sentence, started over. "I can offer you a seat in the main terminal with priority boarding access." Lydia looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the coffee and the bag. "It's fine," she said. She walked out without looking at the couple. Not because she was afraid of what her face might do, but because she had learned a long time ago that some battles cost more than they return, and you had to be deliberate about which ones you picked up. The main terminal at H7 was louder, lit in the specific way of spaces built for movement rather than waiting. She found a row of seats near an outlet, sat down, plugged in her phone, looked at her boarding pass. Around her, O'Hare moved at its usual volume, a family arguing cheerfully about which gate, a toddler carried at full sprint by a man who was running late. Ordinary things. She was thinking about the drive to Fayetteville when someone sat down 1 seat to her left. Not across. 1 seat to her left, which was close enough to indicate intention. She looked up. He was in his late 50s, dark jacket with no insignia, carrying a single bag with the compacted look of someone who'd pared down to essentials over many years of pairing. His hair was military short, going gray at the temples. His posture was the kind that didn't need a uniform to communicate what it was. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at her badge holder. More specifically, at the card behind her hospital ID. The laminated card with the green and black designation she'd kept tucked there for 3 years without quite knowing why she hadn't put it somewhere else. 4th FMSCE, the unit stamp from the 4th Forward Medical Support Company, Eastern Theater. The card had been issued to her by a logistics coordinator in Gaziantep, Turkey, in January 2019, 2 days before she flew into Syria, and nobody had ever asked to see it since. That designation, the man said. His voice was quiet and precise in a way that felt like efficiency rather than caution. Where did you get it? She looked at him steadily. It was given to me. Eastern Theater, 2019. He said it like a key placed carefully in a lock. Lydia said nothing. He turned to face her then, fully. He had an expression she associated with people who had arrived somewhere important after a long route and were not entirely sure how to handle the arrival. My name is Ashford, he said. Raymond Ashford. I was the commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion that the 4th FMSC supported during the Kamal Valley operations. The name moved through her like something hitting cold water. She had heard it once, 3 years ago, in a one-sided conversation she hadn't been part of. Someone on a satellite phone in the hallway outside the field hospital, saying the name with the particular reverence reserved for someone above you who was making decisions you didn't agree with. She hadn't known then who it was. She'd found out later, during the debrief, when they'd told her about the after-action report and what it said, or rather what it didn't say. I know that name, she said. I thought you might. He looked at the badge again. The after-action report for Kamal Valley listed the attending medical support as unidentified civilian volunteer. I filed 2 requests to have that corrected. Both were returned without action. She looked at the terminal around them. Ordinary things kept happening at their ordinary pace. I'm aware of the report, she said. I wanted to find you after the operation, after the review. I didn't have your name. It hadn't been in any document I could access. It took me until last spring to get anything, and even then it was just an NGO contact who'd arranged your embed. He said you'd come home and he'd lost track. A pause. My report listed you. What happened to it wasn't what I filed. I need you to know that. She had known this. She had known it in the way you know something when no one will confirm it and the silence around a subject has a particular weight. She had known it the way you know when you've been erased. The reason I'm on this flight, Ashford said, is the Elms family. Her hands went still on her bag. He noticed. He was the kind of person who noticed things without making it obvious. Helen Elms filed a request with the NGO Oversight Board 8 months ago, he said carefully. She's been trying to find anyone who could give her a medical account, who treated her son, what happened in the field. The official records say he received treatment at a forward medical station. No name. No detail. She's been asking for 3 years and getting the same empty language every time. Lydia reached into her badge holder, took out the card with the unit designation, looked at it for a moment, and put it back. Then she took out the folded piece of paper behind it, the one she'd been carrying for 11 days, and held it without opening it. I know about Carter, she said. Ashford looked at the folded paper and didn't ask. Something about the way he waited made the telling feel like the right thing to do with the space. He wrote me a letter, she said, 7 months after I got back. He'd found the NGO somehow. They passed it along. He wanted to say thank you. She looked at the paper. He died 6 weeks after I got it. Pulmonary embolism. Complication from the original wound. An announcement came over the PA for a flight to Denver. He was 23, she said. 23, Ashford said. Yes. She put the letter back in the badge holder. I've been trying to get to Fayetteville. I want to give the letter to his mother in person. She deserves to hold the original. Ashford was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone not finding words quickly, which she suspected didn't happen to him often. If this story has landed somewhere real in you, stay with me until the end. What you feel right now is the point of all of it. What did you do that night? Ashford said, in the field, for Carter Elms. She thought about whether to say it, and decided the deciding had been going on long enough. He came in with a tension pneumothorax, she said. Shrapnel to the right chest. He wasn't breathing right when they carried him in, and the attending physician we'd had that month had rotated out 2 days before, and his replacement hadn't arrived. It was me and a corpsman named Delgado. She paused. Delgado held the flashlight. I did the needle decompression. In the dark. The generator had been hit 40 minutes before. We had 2 flashlights and a headlamp with dying batteries. She said it without drama, which was the only way she knew how to say it. It worked. His breathing stabilized. We got him onto the transport. She stopped. I didn't know his name until the letter came. He hadn't been conscious enough to tell me, and we didn't have time to look. Ashford set his coffee down with a care that suggested he was doing it to give his hand something to do. He described you, he said, in the statement he gave the VA before he died. He described the nurse who wouldn't leave him, who kept saying his name. I say names, she said, in situations like that. It helps people stay connected to something. He remembered everything you said to him. She looked out at the window. Outside, a plane was pushing back from a gate, moving slowly backward through the gray morning. She told Ashford the rest on the flight. He'd booked economy. She hadn't been surprised. He was across the aisle, 2 rows back, and moved to the empty middle seat beside her during boarding without asking and without explanation. And she hadn't objected because there was still more to say, and the plane gave them 2 hours to say it. She told him about coming home. The way the NGO had apologized in careful language about her records and the gap in her paperwork. The way 3 hospital applications had stalled in ways she couldn't trace. The way she'd eventually stopped applying to teaching hospitals and taken the Hargrove position, night shifts, and learned to stop expecting her work history to land correctly anywhere she sent it. You were 30 when you came back, he said. I've aged. He looked at her. Something in his expression adjusted. I submitted documentation to the oversight board last month, he said. My original after action, the version before it was altered, and a corroborating statement from Delgado. She hadn't thought of Delgado in over a year. He's a nurse practitioner in New Mexico now, Ashford said. He remembered everything. He said, he stopped, then went ahead with it. He said you were the best trauma response he'd seen in 18 months of forward deployment. He said that specifically, and he said he didn't say things like that easily. She looked at her hands. The review board's timeline is several months, Ashford said. I want to be honest about that. But your name will be in the record. What you did at Kamal Valley will be documented. It happened whether it's documented or not, she said. Yes. He said it without dismissing her. But the paper version matters. I've spent 3 years believing it doesn't, and arriving at the same conclusion every time. He paused. Carter Elms's mother deserves a name to attach to what happened to her son. Helen deserves a document that says who was there. Lydia looked at the seat back in front of her. Someone had left a half-finished crossword in the pocket. I know, she said. She said it quietly, which was not the same as easily. The plane reached cruising altitude before she spoke again. He asked me about biscuits, she said. Ashford waited. When I was keeping him talking, I asked him what he was going to do when he got home, and he said he was going to learn to make his grandmother's biscuits. He'd been meaning to ask her for years and kept finding reasons not to. She paused. He was embarrassed about it, about not having asked yet, like he was worried he'd run out of time. Outside the window, the cloud cover was solid and white, the flat light of a Midwestern November. Did he? Ashford asked. Ask her? I don't know, Lydia said. I'm hoping Helen can tell me. At Charlotte Douglas, they walked through the terminal together toward the exit. Ashford was on his phone, something about the oversight board, scheduling a statement. Lydia was 3 steps ahead, thinking about the rental car and the drive, when she heard him say her name into the phone. The nurse I mentioned, Lydia Farr, yes, she's with me now. She's on her way to Fayetteville. She has documentation. She didn't look back, but she was aware, from the corner of her eye, of Preston Holst passing them in the opposite direction, heading toward the ground transportation. He had his carry-on in one hand and his phone in the other, and he glanced up the way people do when a name is said nearby. He looked at Ashford first, the posture, the particular gravity of a man accustomed to being obeyed. and then at Lydia, at the scrubs, at the badge holder with the cards tucked behind the hospital ID. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not recognition of anything specific. Just the faint recalibration of a man who has made a comfortable assessment and is now finding it slightly less comfortable than it was. He looked away. He kept walking. That was all. No words, no confrontation, no moment that could be photographed and shared. Just a man who had looked at someone and decided she didn't belong, walking past the same woman and being less certain of himself than he'd been an hour ago. It was a small thing. It was enough. Helen Elms lived in a single-story house on a street that had the settled, slightly tired look of a neighborhood that had been the same for 30 years and was fine with that. The lawn needed one more mow before winter. Wind chimes on the porch moved in the cold without making much sound. A large blonde dog looked at Lydia through the storm door when she reached the step. Helen opened the door before Lydia could knock. She was 58 and had the face of someone who had been strong for a long time and was still doing it, even now, with a stranger standing on her porch, holding a duffel bag and a piece of paper that hadn't been opened in 11 days. "You're the nurse," Helen said, not a question. "Yes," Lydia said. Helen opened the door wider. They sat at the kitchen table. The dog settled at Helen's feet immediately, the way dogs do when they understand where their person needs to be. Helen made coffee without asking. Lydia watched her move around the kitchen with the quiet automation of someone who had made coffee for people arriving with difficult things before and had gotten practiced at it and still found it hard. When they were sitting, the mugs between them, Lydia took the letter from her badge holder and held it for a moment before placing it on the table. "He wrote this to me 7 months after he came home," she said. "I want you to have the original. It belongs to you." Helen looked at the folded paper and did not reach for it immediately. She put both hands around her mug. "Did you know," she said, "that he went home and learned to make biscuits?" The kitchen was very still. "He called his grandmother in November," Helen said. "That first year. She taught him over the phone. It took 4 batches to get it right." She smiled, just barely, just at the edge of it. "He made them for Christmas that year. He was so proud." A pause. He told his grandmother he'd been motivated. He said someone had reminded him to stop putting things off. Lydia kept her hands flat on the table. There was an old water ring on the wood, just a pale circle, there long enough it had become part of the surface. "I told him," she said, "that he was going to have time for it. I wanted him to think about something specific, something waiting for him." Helen nodded slowly. "He came home and he did the thing," she said, "the specific thing." She looked at Lydia steadily, with eyes that had been doing difficult seeing for a long time and had not flinched yet. "That's what I needed to know, that he wasn't just waiting out the time. He had things he was still going toward." She reached for the letter. She unfolded it with the care of someone who knew she would read it many more times. Lydia watched her read. She didn't look away, because this wasn't the kind of moment you gave someone privacy from. This was the kind of moment that needed a witness, the same way Carter had needed someone to say his name in the dark. Not to fix anything, just to not be alone. Helen read the letter twice. The dog shifted. The wind chimes outside made a sound, finally. "He says you never told him your name," Helen said. There wasn't time, and then he was on the transport. "He says," Helen read carefully. "She knew mine, though. She said it enough times that I started to believe she'd decided I didn't have permission to leave." She looked up. "Did you feel that? That he was going to make it?" Lydia thought about it honestly. "I felt like he was trying," she said. "Some people try harder than others, and it matters. He was trying hard." Helen folded the letter again, her hands steady and deliberate. She held it for a moment, then placed it on the table in front of her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I should have come sooner." "You came," Helen said. "That's the thing that counts." She picked up her mug. "Carter would have agreed with me. He said should-haves were the most useless category of thought." A pause that held something close to warmth. He was right about that. Lydia drove back toward the highway in the rental car when it was fully dark, the streetlights making yellow pools on wet asphalt. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She pulled over at a gas station, engine running, and read the message. It was a forwarded communication from the NGO Oversight Board, passed through Ashford's office. One paragraph. Her name had been formally submitted for inclusion in the official medical support record for Operation Kamal Valley. She would be contacted for a statement. The process would take several months. She read it twice, then she put the phone away and pulled back onto the road. She thought about what Helen had said, about Carter calling his grandmother in November, learning over the phone, 4 batches before it came out right, about the way he'd gone home and done the specific thing, the thing that had been waiting for him. She'd spent 3 years telling herself the record didn't matter, that the doing was what counted, that the paper version of things was just paper. She'd been partly right about that. The doing was what counted. Carter Elms had gone home and learned to make biscuits, and that had been real and true, and nobody could take it away. It had happened the way things happen, without ceremony, without anyone watching, without a form filed in triplicate to authorize the feeling. But the paper mattered too. Helen Elms had needed a name to go with what she knew. Delgado had needed to tell someone what he'd seen. Ashford had needed to correct a record that had been wrong for 3 years. The truth was the truth whether or not it was written, but the writing was the thing that let other people carry it. The writing was how the truth survived the people who knew it firsthand. She merged onto the interstate. The dark came in from both sides, and the highway stretched out flat and long, and the November cold pressed against the car windows, and she had hours before Charlotte. Somewhere behind her, in a house on a quiet street, Helen Elms was sitting at her kitchen table with her dog at her feet and a letter in her hands that she was probably reading for the 3rd time. A letter with a name on it now, finally, after 3 years of asking. And the record that had been wrong was in the process of being made right. And a man named Ashford had filed the paperwork that should have been filed in 2019 and was only getting there now, slow the way correct things are sometimes slow, but moving. It was not everything. It was not fast. It was not the clean resolution that the wrong deserved to be met with. But it was the beginning of everything, which was the only place everything could start. Lydia Farr drove through the November dark and thought about a young man who had stopped putting things off, who had called his grandmother and asked the question he'd been afraid there wouldn't be time for. She thought about how much of what matters gets passed between people in the dark, quietly, without anyone watching or writing it down. And then sometimes someone writes it down anyway, and that, it turned out, mattered more than she had let herself believe.